right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 135 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I've got my regular co-hosts here today with me. Ian Kummer from a suburb in Moscow, Carlo Parcelli from Washington, D.C., and our special guest today is Regis Tremblay, coming from Yalta in the Crimea. So, thank you guys all very much for joining us this it's morning for me, 9 a.m., noon in DC, and you guys got 8 p.m. in Russia?
Yep.
8 p.m. in Russia. So we entitled today's program, The West's Brutal Ignorance, and that's kind of a reference to, the overall approach to global affairs that the West takes, which is not really conducive to achieving peace and mutual prosperity, right? It seems that the West is more concerned with, global hegemony and maintaining domination and power and control over resources, markets, and governments. And they're not really that concerned about, sovereignty and multipolarism and everybody just learning how to work together as a bunch of equal states. So and this plays out with two of the most important thinkers, I think, that are on the alternative media, John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs. So Mearsheimer, he's he comes from the school of realism with regards to geopolitics, and he's got this thesis that says it's like the inevitability. I'm butchering it. The inevitability of big power politics, and his thesis is that two great powers can't help but confront each other, and that cooperation is out of the question. Whereas Jeffrey Sachs, vehemently disagrees with John's thesis, and he sees John's thesis as wrong, and he condemns the West for projecting their own desire for hegemony and domination. They call it security, right? Mearsheimer calls that security. It's a security competition. But the West projects its own desire to be secure by controlling everything onto other players, and this results in the inevitability of conflict. So, but again, I think I agree with Sachs, right? It's the West, and it's their own brutal ignorance that is resulting in this inability for the U.S. to just cooperate and play nice. They have to enter into this security. They call it security competition, but to them, security is total global hegemony. That's how they are the most secure, when they are dominating the planet. Anyway, guys, I am sorry for beating that dead horse, but I think you understand, my general point. Do we want to discuss that, or do we want to pivot to the Zelensky meeting at the White House?
I'm good with what you want to start with.
You wanna give your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, for me, I think this need to dominate goes all the way back 80 years to the end of World War II, the Yalta Conference, and probably more importantly, Potsdam, because by Potsdam, FDR had died, Truman had taken over. And, between Churchill bending Truman's ear, they wanted to destroy Russia. There's no doubt about that. We don't have to get into the details of it now, but I think the United States, from the end of World War II, then certainly through the Cold War, were really on a trajectory for full spectrum dominance of the planet. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the project for the new American century really were positioning the United States to project American leadership, and they felt it was good both for America and the world. But it was leadership through strength. It was leadership through domination. And I will add to this that Barack Obama came out and said it as clearly as anybody did. He said it at the United Nations, and he said it at an address at West Point. He said, America is the exceptional nation. We are the one indispensable nation from the past century, and that will be that way in the future. Now, to me, this was a projection of this view of America that nobody else is like us. And if we're the one indispensable country, what does that mean for everybody else? You all are indispensable. And therefore, why should we bother even listening to you or paying attention? The one last thing I want to say is this. I don't like to include the West anymore when we're talking about what's happening. I really believe it's the United States against the rest of the world. What we've seen in the past week is people in the European Union apparently are saying we need to get ready to go it alone. Trump is hostile. He doesn't like us. We can't trust him. So I think we're seeing a real shift. I don't think it's going to be good for the West. I think that Europe is going to really suffer. Japan is going to suffer. All of America's allies are going to suffer because the United States really now, under Trump, has really turned a deaf ear to anybody else. It's my deal, our way, or that's it. That's my take on it, Billy Bob.
Thank you very much, Regis. I have a lot to say, so I'm going to hand it over to Ian because nobody will get a word in edgewise if I start rambling. Go ahead, Ian.
Well, as far as the thesis that world powers can't cooperate, I don't know what historical basis he has for saying that, because for most of, well, not all of the Cold, well, no, actually, yes, for all of the Cold War, those top three world powers, there was always two of them, for the most part, aligned with each other. China and the Soviet Union were aligned until Khrushchev. Then you had the Sino-Soviet split due to de-Stalinization mostly, and then Nixon brought the two together, there is cooperation between China and the USA. I mean, it's a strange, I would call it a strange relationship, but what the one China policy is formally acknowledged, and always has been formally acknowledged by the USA, and they're so economically entwined. There's really no other word for it except cooperation. And I mean, the Yeltsin period, we could say, well, okay, Russia was weak, was falling apart, wasn't really even a superpower except for the nukes. I think that's a fair characterization, but it wasn't a partner relationship. But now with the new regime in the USA, I think it's likely there won't necessarily be cooperation, but there will be a mutual understanding. It's too early to say that, but I think that's the direction we're headed, especially if Trump wants to economically challenge China. I don't think he wants to be aggressive towards China. I know there's a lot of fear of him, doing a pivot. It's not really an end to the arms race. He's just pivoting. I know there's a lot of fear for that. But my main argument against that is that he gutted USAID. A lot of that was directed towards China. So if he really wanted to prop up Taiwan as a porcupine in China's backyard. If he wanted to destabilize China, I don't think he would have gutted USA, because that's what it's looking like. They're reducing the entire workforce in USA down to a little over 200 people. So I think he want, and I don't necessarily agree with it. I'm not married to the idea of tariffs or trade wars or any of that. But I understand the logic to it. It's that if you look at the USA, you're like, okay, it's too much of a service economy. We need to bring back deindustrialization and eliminate dependency. The three countries you would want to eliminate dependency on are Canada, Mexico, and China, because those are the three countries where most of those finished, those manufactured goods, if you're just like, okay, we want to bring back manufacturing, those are the three countries that the manufactured goods from before. So I can understand the logic.
I actually checked yesterday, and yeah, those three countries are really tied basically. I mean, China's actually third. I forget if Canada, Mexico is first, but they're basically tied as our top three trade partners. It's like those three are our top, and then you start getting a fewer and fewer people. But so I mean, okay, yes. So Carlo, unmute here. I can unmute you probably, and then go ahead.
He's still muted. Hold on.
I think
here. You just click. You're good, Carlo.
Yeah. It's a general feeling that Trump's intention is to bring that sense of America's U.S.'s superiority back into play, or to create an actual situation in which the American economy is, and not necessarily its military, is obviously the shining example of its hegemony, of a real force in the world, which China obviously is rapidly overtaking. Is there any sense there? Because that seems to be the irony of it. In the end.
If I may, so Regis started talking about the historical development and how the United States during the Cold War, ended up being the the global economic superpower, right? So we were in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Once the Soviet Union dismantled itself, the United States was really preeminent, but it was never really a fair a fight, you might say, between the Soviet Union and the West, considering the Soviet Union was so devastated and destroyed following the war, and it was the United States alone accounted for half the global economy after World War II. So the United States just had so many resources to use, and they were just way ahead of the rest of the world at the end of World War II. But ultimately, they were able to use their advantages, and to win the Cold War, they got the Soviet Union to dismantle itself. And again, we've talked about that many times. It really seems like it was a diplomatic effort that ultimately won, and there wasn't any military fighting that ended the Soviet Union, but it was through diplomacy. And essentially it turned out to be a bunch of lies, right? So they convinced the Soviet Union to dismantle itself by promising that we will have peace through mutual prosperity, that we will have cooperation, and we will respect the sovereignty of these countries, and we will not move NATO 1 inch further to the east. So these were the things that Yeltsin and Gorbachev were foolish to believe. And once they did believe that, once the Soviet Union was dismantled, the West said, we won. They fell for it. We conquered them, and now we can do what we want. And so I see Trump as doing more of what we want. So right now, the U.S. Dollar is the world reserve currency. It accounts for like over 80% of all global transactions. So that's something that they're going to fight to maintain. They're going to fight to maintain dollar dominance. They're going to fight to maintain, their control over markets and governments. but I think they feel that they're overextended, and that's why we see this little bit of retrenching, this Fortress America thing, and we're going to streamline, our system. China has this command economy that is very good for, economic competition, and they can, just really, at the snap of their fingers, they can adjust their economy on a huge scale, and the West just doesn't have that capability. So part of it is producing a more a government that is more that is less gridlock, right, and less checks and balances, less bureaucracy. They want to be able to dictate things from the top as well, like China does, so that they can better compete. I kind of see that going, but so Trump, he's definitely about maintaining, the privileges and the benefits that the U.S. has had since the end of World War II, and they're on the decline. But he's doing he's going to do his best to try and maintain it. That's kind of one way to look at things. Regis, any thoughts?
Well, I don't disagree at all. You had mentioned, Jeffrey Sachs as a counterposition to Mersheimer. I haven't been a big fan of Jeffrey Sachs because of what he did in Russia in the 1990s, and there's really no denying that. He's a free market capitalist. He's an economist. And, a lot of people are listening to him today because, he's attacking the United States on a number of different levels. Many of us have been doing that for a lot longer than Jeffrey Sachs has. We just don't have his pedigree, let's say. But I think, I don't know. I'm not sure if the United States is able to make a lasting agreement. Let me put it that way. I know that Russia has very little trust of the United States, and for good reason. You've talked about it on this show. We've talked about it together. All of the times since World War II that the United States has given Russia reason to not trust. Most recently, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul. And now Trump wants to make a deal. And he says Putin wants to make a deal. And from my perspective, I don't think Russia has to make a deal. And to use Trump's metaphor, Putin has all the cards. And so getting back to whether or not the United States is open to agreement, if it's even possible, I'm not really sure. Because when I read Trump and what he's doing, I think he's basically saying, I'm the card dealer. I own the casino. And I'm going to make the deals that are good for America, but I'm not sure that he really is too much concerned with making deals that are good for China, that are good for Russia. That's my take. And all I can say is, the next few weeks are going to give all of us a much better idea about Trump's sincerity and whether or not he is willing to accept China and Russia as somewhat equals at the table. That's my question.
Well, I'll agree with Regis that what's working against Trump, even if best case scenario, Trump is 100% sincere, the American system is notorious, including Trump himself. The American system is notorious for and the reason why is despite being, the most democratic country in the world, as we like to call ourselves, the president has a huge amount of unilateral power. which means that that if you make a deal with one president, even if there's legislation involved, the very next president, 4 years later, can completely reverse it. We saw this. One of the most notorious examples of this was the Iran nuclear deal. They actually made an agreement with Obama that, okay, we are not, Iranians said, okay, we don't need nuclear weapons, and they made a deal, in return for our frozen assets. They made this deal, and then Trump just read it out to say, you know what, I don't like that deal, so we're just going to renege it. And then, and actually, I think the most amazing aspect, it's amazing, of course, that Trump just on a whim reversed it. But what's even more amazing is that Trump was, as it turns out, a one-term president, got booted out 4 years later. The Iranians actually came back to the table and said, hey, look, that last guy reneged on the deal, but we're willing to bring it back on similar conditions. Biden also said no, because he didn't want to look weak on Iran in the eyes of Republicans and warhawk Democrats. So he doubled down. He actually doubled down and said, no, we're not going to bring it back, even though the Iranians literally said, we're willing to bring back the deal. And Biden also said no. So that's a big problem now that Trump himself is going to face, is convincing people that any deal he makes is going to last more than 4 years, because whoever replaces, and we know he's going to be a one-term president now because he's already done half of his 8 years. So 4 years, God knows who's going to be president after Trump. That person may reverse it. So that's the major problem Trump's going to have in any negotiation. Though I think on the flip side of that, I think Russia is not against the dollar as a reserve. I think to an extent the Chinese aren't either. So this was the huge problem. I was saying this, a lot of people were saying this, that Biden was destroying American hegemony by weaponizing the dollar. And when the dollar declines past a certain point as a percentage of the transactions in the world, then it just turns into a bank run. People just don't want to hold dollars because there's just so much debt associated with the dollar. And the only thing keeping it from, the house of cards from collapsing is that there's so much of it in circulation. So many people use it. If Biden's policies had just scared people away from the dollar, that would, in the long term, I think, wreck the whole American system. So Trump is correct to recognize that, but I think it's going to be easy for him to convince the Russians and the Chinese also, I think, that, no, we don't need a BRICS currency. We don't need a competitor to the dollar. Let's just stick with the dollar. I think that's going to be a very easy sell.
We're hearing different things from BRICS. So China is like saying, yeah, we're not interested in destroying dollar global hegemony. But then Lula, I think, said, oh, we're absolutely going to continue to work to do that. But, I don't think anybody would have a problem with it if the U.S. didn't abuse and exploit their privilege, right? And they do that through the sanctioning, arbitrary sanctions of, whatever they think will benefit their interests. They'll abuse that privilege. And that's the problem. If the United States would, be a responsible leader and use the privilege of world reserve currency appropriately, nobody would have a problem. Right? Nobody would be complaining about this dollar hegemony. But the problem is when they abuse it. And so remember Marco Rubio, before he became the Secretary of State, and he was lamenting that the problem is we're not going to be able to sanction people anymore if we don't have this dollar hegemony. And but they need to understand that's an abuse of this privilege. And we like stability. We like everyone, being able to participate. And there's not a lot of volatility, with the world reserve currency. But when you abuse it, that's certainly a big problem.
Well, I'll
Okay.
say about Rubio. I just want to mention Rubio real quick. I mean, little Rubio, as I like to call him. I mean,
Go, Marco.
I'm not a fan of Rubio by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think he's a particularly smart person or a particularly well-educated person. But I think Trump put him there to make peace with the mainstream Democratic Party. And I will say about Rubio is that he is, so far at least, been a team player, right?
Oh yeah.
That was a big problem with the first Trump administration, that there were a bunch of people in it that were not team players.
Yeah.
But so far, he's been a team player. And what's also interesting is that, not to get off topic, but with the Ukraine meeting, with the Zelensky meeting, from what the news was saying afterwards, Rubio had gone into that room, sure that Zelensky was going to sign the mineral agreement. And he had apparently actually told Trump in advance, oh, yeah, it's a done deal. Zelensky's going to sign. So it was actually a friendly meeting. And all the camera angles of Rubio are just him sunk in his seat, like, what the hell is going on? Because he was completely blind. And he said it was kind of embarrassing for him also because, 5 minutes earlier he had told Trump, oh, yeah, it's a done deal. And then Zelensky, for other reasons, which I'm sure we can get into on the show, said, no, we're not going to do it, F off. So, yeah, that's my take on Rubio in recent events.
Yeah, I think Ian made a good point that Russia knows what the system is in the United States. That every 4 years every 4 years is going to be an election, and things could dramatically be reversed. And we're seeing that right before our eyes. Russia's looking at this. All of the executive orders that Biden signed, Trump is signing as many, just eliminating all of those. And so from where Russia is sitting, it's like, you know what? I don't think we can really trust these guys. We want to see some concrete action. And there are two things that I'd like to point out, and I hope that I'm not straying from the core of the conversation, but Russia, in the first meeting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, an agreement to reopen all of the embassies and consulates and restaff them. And now I just read this evening that Russia, through Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson, is saying that they're asking the United States to remove the sanctions as part of this goodwill negotiation. On top of that, Russia is asking Trump to remove the sanctions against direct flights from Moscow to the United States. So I think what Russia wants is to see some concrete evidence that there will be benefits for Russia in at least these three areas that I'm just talking about. And the other thing that I think is huge is Trump has mentioned it, and Putin certainly would go along with this, is the nuclear proliferation. I think Trump may be sincere about that, although on the other hand, he wants his Iron Dome and still millions or trillions of dollars, whatever it's going to be, to upgrade the nuclear arsenal. So there's a lot of contradictory stuff, but at least in principle, the four things that I've just mentioned from Russia's perspective is, okay, Trump, if you're serious, let's see something concrete that's going to benefit us too.
And like you said previously, in the first Trump administration, Russia outright said the United States is agreement incapable, and that's still the reality. Like you said, I mean, the next president, who knows who it's going to be, can just undo everything Trump did. So at the most, you get 3 years and 9 months or whatever it is. Carlo, you want to unmute and share your wisdom? Unmute though. Yeah, there you go.
Well, I don't want to go. I also don't want to drift too far off. But to talk about the currency and Xi and China saying that they don't want to become the the dominant currency of the world. Well, that depends on how much you invest in the world, and much of the world is shunning the IMF and the World Bank, the traditional lending arm of the United States. And just to throw in my 2 cents again, and talk a little bit about Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have just signed on as a federation, and now have a common currency between the three countries. And Ghana has requested, in very strong terms, that the U.S. military leave Ghana, and even countries like Nigeria and Senegal and Chad are also leaning, because they're gaining so much, not only from Russian security, but from Chinese development. So if you're the one developing, you're the one that's lending. So the renminbi is what's at the core. The yuan, the Chinese currency, is at the core. That's what's being traded. So China can say all at once about currency, then they don't want to become the dominant currency. But if they're not the ones that are going in and building the schools and helping build the dams and the roadways and the farms and everything else, the manufacturing. I mean, for Christ's sake, whoever thought that Ghana and Burkina Faso would be building automobiles specifically for an African audience? And it's not, believe me, it's not the World Bank money. It's Chinese money that's investing in all of this. And they're finding the terms equitable, and they're finding the work done on time, done right, the instruction helpful, very much unlike rebuilding Iraq, for example, at Halliburton, where they, even the Marine barracks there, the U.S. Marine barracks there, were shitholes that I wouldn't even live in. And so you can say all you want, and then you watch CNN and Bolsonaro, he's so popular in Brazil, he's got to come back into power. There's a lot of lying going on, traditional lying going on among American media. The thing, I just want to say one more thing. The most surprising thing to me, or one of the ones that I muse over the most, is this notion that you can you have a great deal of the electorate who at once in America, at once sees at once that Trump is a threat to domestic policy, yet at the same time remains totally bamboozled or refusing to understand the chronology of the war in Iraq. The war in Ukraine. Well, the war in Iraq too, if you want to, but the war in Ukraine, where it's obvious that the United States goaded it on and brought it into existence. That's so that's all I had in my mind.
So hopefully Regis will be able to come back. I'm not sure what happened, but so you brought up several things, Carlo. Where I got distracted when Regis left. I'm sorry. So,
well, I just wanted to point out that that's a supreme irony. I mean, I grew up during the Gulf of Tonkin situation, and I was 16 years old, and I could see through that, and knew it was bullshit, and I told my father this is bullshit, and he warned me about it. He said, "Yeah, it's a bunch of liars," and so, and then you had Iran-Contra, which I was heavily involved in, and that turned out to be, a bunch of lies. It's kind of, the Iran-Contra was kind of a reverse of what we have now with Ukraine, and that is that the Congress told Reagan and the executive branch that no, they could not continue the war against the Sandinistas, war if you want to call it a war, and they mustered this idiot Oliver North and all these other people, and they had a secret war, so to speak. And the October surprise, which was a clear theft of that election between Carter and Reagan. And so now you have a situation where the people themselves can't seem to pick up on the basics. There's two types of people out there. There's the Democrats, or whatever, basically, or what they call the left, that sees the war in Ukraine as a patriotic war of the Ukrainian parts, and the Russians are invaded without any reason to invade, just sheer greed and power hungry. And then you have the MAGA people who don't even know what Ukraine is. They don't care. They don't know. Their whole agenda is entirely different. It's been woke. It's been woke in the wrong way. And so their interests are immigration, eggs at $6 a dozen or whatever, that sort of thing. So you've got no one out there, including the Trump people, who have a kind of handle on the way the situation's developing, and I think once again we have, what's the title of the show? Brutal ignorance. The West. It goes right back to my old cliche. The people in the United States are ninnies. I mean, to get fooled again on Ukraine, like people that I used to hang with. Once again, I'm not going to go through this thing where I have to find people who know a little bit about Ukraine and know the chronology of how that conflict developed. I mean, even Trump knows how it developed now. Somebody got to him. I think it's this guy Witkoff, but it could have been Tulsi Gabbard. It could have been anyone who said, "This is what happened, Donnie. Sit down and listen. Stop farting into your pants and listen for a minute, and I'll tell you what happened." And he understood. He believed him, and that's and from all that flows all of this talk about peace and so on and so forth. The other thing is, it's in Trump's personality not to want war. When somebody shows him a film of a Ukrainian, 45-year-old Ukrainian soldier taking a high caliber round to the head and no longer has a head, with Trump, that resonates. And so I've said more than I wanted to say, but
because
I'm gonna get off.
because that could have been Trump himself if he didn't look the other way when the bullet came at his head, maybe. But okay, Carlo, you talked a lot about oligarchy and the reality of oligarchy, and I want to add my 2 cents. So number one, there is no accountability for the oligarchy. They're never held accountable. They have a succession of losses, of military losses, going back to Vietnam, like you talked about. And then they lost in Iraq. They lost in Afghanistan. And now we're going to lose in Ukraine. And nobody is ever held accountable. And I'm thinking that they're okay losing. Like they're winning just by having these military conflicts, because it's they're able to exploit them and profit from them, right? The military industrial complex. There was this thing on Telegram, and it was probably bullshit, but I think there was a lot of truth to it. Basically, maybe Zelensky. Yeah, the allegation was Zelensky told Trump about how many millions each of the people, the Democrats, were getting kickbacks from the 350 billion that was given to Ukraine. So they said, Nancy Pelosi was given 70 billion. Shifty Schiff got like 30 million, not billion, million. So there was this list with all these Democrats that were pushing the Ukraine war, and allegedly Zelensky had told exactly how much they received in kickbacks from this 350 billion. So, and I don't think it's true. I think it's fake news, but I think it illustrates an actual reality. I think there's an actual reality there where everybody is invested in pushing this war, even though they don't care about winning. This is the thing. They don't even care about winning because the fact that the war continues means profit for themselves and their own very narrow interests. And then you talked about the ninnies, right? So it's the media. The media is owned by the same people that own the politicians, right? And so it's very nice. And they don't want the citizenry informed. They don't want us to have influence in politics. They want us to be marginalized, confused, and ignorant about what's going on, because then they can do whatever they want without any interference. And so they use the media to either just make us really stupid and dumb us down, or to make us cheerleaders for what they want to do, even though it's totally against our own interests, right? But you got a lot of idiots doing that. They're cheerleading these awful policies that are detrimental, not just to the American people, but to all of humanity. All right, I'm ranting. I'm upset that Regis left, but I know, I'm sure he had a good reason. If it wasn't a
Crimea, it might not have been a choice. Crimea, because I was there for about 2 weeks, and their connection to Western internet is weird. It's not like, because I'm in Moscow now, but Crimea is weird. I don't know why that is. They might have just had connection problems, but I would like to extend on what Carlos said. Is, as far as MAGA goes, MAGA not really knowing very much or caring about Ukraine, and just want, they only care about the price of eggs and that sort of gasoline and that sort of thing. Well, at the bottom line, if every major country was just like, what, we only care about the price of eggs, the price of gasoline, and the price of food, the world would be a better place. What's screwing it up right now is that people feel like, well, we need influence, we need a rules-based world order, we need every conflict in the world is something we have to personally get involved in. That's what's screwing things up right now. So my concern is that in Europe, you have the AfD in Germany and these other, you have the, I forget what that French party is called, but basically the problem with them is that right-wing populism in Europe is different from American right-wing populisms. I'd consider it a lot more unpredictable. So I'm not sure if that's, Europe, let's be honest, Europe has this tendency to swing from far left to far right. You had Weimar Republic, and, I know some people dispute my use of the word left, but you had a very, 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 very progressive, let's call it progressive, a very progressive Weimar Republic. And then, in the span of a couple of months, they were, you had Hitler and Hindenburg's government, and Hindenburg died, and then you had Nazi Germany. That happened in a very short period of time. The problem is those right-wing American right-wing populists will say, I want my, make America great again, the South wasn't bad type of thing, and they keep it in the USA. But the problem with Europe is they don't think that way. They have a tendency, when you have right-wing populism in Europe, they have a tendency to want to march on Moscow. That's the problem with a European. So I'd say there's definitely a difference between those two. And yeah, that was my thought on that. Do we want? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead, Carlo.
I just wanted to add that with both sides, what what mystifies me, the how brutal the ignorance is of the people who were, say, anti-war when it came to other things. There are people who have been in the streets. I know personally most of their lives who are on who I don't want to say you're on the Ukrainian side. That sounds, but who are willing to see many Ukrainians die, and this is very enlightening to me. They're willing to see proxies die. But if it's their own, if there's their own family members, they're at risk. They don't want to see the bloodshed. They don't want them to go anywhere. And then on the other side, you have the MAGA people who, whatever you can say about the issues, immigration, the economics, whatever you want, gender, they've all been led around by the nose. They're a bunch of fools to think that those are serious problems. And I'll just say this for the umpteenth time, the only reason we have an immigration problem is because the United States, and this links up with what Ian just said, because the United States has set about destabilizing their countries. The only reason Venezuelans are coming up here, they would have a government that would take them cradle to grave as essentially middle class citizens, if the U.S. wouldn't bother them. Look at Cuba. Just take Cuba. If the United States would stop invading, stop destabilizing these other countries, we wouldn't have an immigration problem. If you heard some yahoo on the street say the United States is the best place to live, if we're, say, somewhere just a few blocks from me, where there's trash all over the ground, and people are living next to boarded up buildings, they would shut the fuck up, because other places would be beautiful compared. There'd be Shangri-Las compared to the U.S. And I just have to drive 45 minutes or an hour to, or into the foothills of West Virginia. You want to see poverty? Drive to West Virginia.
Well,
goddamn idiots.
That's where
fucking idiot Americans.
J.D. Vance.
Fuck Americans.
In West
I'm
Virginia.
sorry, but fuck them. They're so stupid.
Yeah, no, I mean, you brought up that, the ones that were protesting the Iraq war that you were on the streets with are now, wearing the Ukrainian flags and putting them on their profile pictures, and just, because like you said, it's different when it's, their own family that might be going off to war and dying, or a proxy. But also it's the media. Like, the media these people are susceptible to liberal indoctrination. And so there's this very simple and facile narrative about, Russian aggression and evil Russia, and the United States is good. And so we have to support the poor victims of Russian aggression. These people, they deep throat that like it's, I don't want to say anyway. Okay. So it's just so good to them. They just want to believe that so bad. They want to believe it so bad that they refuse to study. They refuse to research. They refuse to hear truth. They reject truth in favor of this delicious narrative that makes them feel so good. So I don't know how you overcome that. I don't know how you can overcome the mindlessness, the ignorance of these people, because I posted a timeline about the events of the Ukraine war. Any objective reading of the relevant timeline it's incontrovertible that Russia is a victim of imperialist aggression. Russia is the victim of Western imperialist aggression, using this poor country of Ukraine as a proxy to weaken and damage and destroy this sovereign government that the Western Empire finds, inconvenient. So that's obviously what's going on. Anybody can figure that out. You don't have to be particularly smart to figure that out. You just have to look at the timeline. But yeah, it's amazing how susceptible people are to this indoctrination process. And I don't know how to overcome that. So Ian, you sound like you look like you got something going on with, I know what it is. It's that commenter, isn't it? I see his name there. Go ahead, Carlo.
I just wanted to add that you're right. And the thing about the media is they know the truth. They know it. And for personal selfish reasons, for having the nice house in Fox Hall out here, or the great condo in Northern Virginia, they're willing to lie so that even though literally thousands of people are dying, they're willing to sit on the lie.
I mean, I characterize it. David K is appreciating your unfiltered honesty.
Thank you, David.
But give him a couple shows and we'll see if he has the same tune. Just kidding. So, I just, my take on the media is a little bit different, right? I feel that, it's not like they lie a lot. It's like that's their job. Their job is to further the interests of the ruling establishment and to further the interests of the oligarchs. And then both political parties also have that same job. And yet, while they're doing that, they have to maintain this facade of democracy, right? They have to retain this pretense of democracy. And that's where the media comes in to explain everything through a partisan lens of Republican Democrat. So they explain everything through this Republican Democrat lens. But it's all a hoax, and it's all theater to obfuscate the reality of, an oligarchy, a uniparty oligarchy that's determined to, maintain these particular relationships around the globe and, hegemony really, and then control over the governments, resources, and markets of the planet. And so the bottom line is it is about money. It is about power. And democratic aspirations, the freedom, democracy, liberal values have absolutely nothing to do with any of it except to sell it to the gullible dupes that, are the supposed voters. Anyway.
So where there's lemmings, there's a cliff. So where's the cliff? That's what I want to know.
So, okay, I think it's Ian, you can cut us off anytime you have something you want to say. But I was just going to launch into this idea that, we're probably, it seems like we could have a war with Iran. So Peskov this morning was saying that, Russia is dedicated to facilitating a peaceful settlement with Iran. They don't want to come to, they don't want war. But, the United States is busy shipping, these tremendously large munitions called the mother of all bombs to Israel, ostensibly for the express purpose of dropping them on Iran's nuclear facilities. And so I don't know, Trump's behavior, if anything, he is not friendly with Iran and he is very friendly with Israel. And I could just see how the minute we do some kind of a deal with Ukraine, even if that's possible, we're going to see tensions heating up with Iran. Hopefully that could also be settled peacefully, but quite possibly it's possible that Trump, once he brings peace to Ukraine, if he can, he will definitely launch a war against Iran or let Israel bomb Iran and really go for regime change there. And then following that, assuming, let's just say he's successful. He can't. I don't think he can ever get a regime change in Iran. But let's say he quiets the Ukrainian front. He regime changes Iran, and then he's in a really, really powerful position to deal with China. So ostensibly that could be our short-term future the next 4 years. But I'm just throwing fun stuff out there to speculate. Ian,
I think a bombing campaign by Israel against Iran is unlikely because those bombs, sending more JDAMs, because that's the mother of all MOABs or JDAMs essentially. There's nothing special about them. They need to get planes to Iranian airspace and not have them shot down, and also Iran not respond to it. Which and that last feud Israel and Iran had last year, Iran got the last word. They did 2 big drone and ballistic missile attacks on Israel, and after the last one, Israel didn't do anything about it. So I think the point has been made that Israel is a glass house, that Iran could really hurt them if they wanted to. They could target their salination plants. They could target their power generation abilities. There's a lot they could do to basically turn it into Gaza, essentially. Just no electricity, nothing. And I don't think that's going to. I don't think that's likely. I don't think
Would
there's any.
Netanyahu like that?
Well, Netanyahu's got his hands full. I mean, they want to. I mean, so the peace deal, the cease, not peace deal. It's not a peace deal. Definitely not a peace deal. It's a ceasefire. The ceasefire expired.
Yeah,
and I don't know what Israel's plan is, because I don't understand how anyone in Israel thinks that another 16 months of ground combat in Gaza, even if they win, is survivable for their economy, or that they're going to have to continue conscripting people to fight in Gaza and be killed in Gaza. And no one in his right mind is going to be a tourist or want to move to Israel while they're engaged in a major ground war. I don't understand. I'm not even sure there is a strategy here, except Netanyahu knowing that the minute there's peace, he's going to be removed from office and possibly prosecuted. I don't understand Israeli prosecuted, but I think he's done as soon as the war is over. He's kind of in a similar position as Zelensky. He's a war president, and that keeps him in power. But the minute he stops being a war president, people are just hate him so much, he's going to be removed from power, maybe worse. Except in at least in Zelensky's case, he could maybe go to France or Italy or something. But I mean, Netanyahu's so hated and actually has that
ICC
has that warrant. Yeah, so it's
a
very complex situation for him.
Israel would like the United States to go all in on a violent military regime change effort against Iran. And I think you're right. Israel could be devastated. I think Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf monarchies, the despots would also be harmed tremendously if they really go after Iran. And there's no certainty that the regime change would be successful in Iran. And yet it just seems that that's really, really what Israel wants to do. And the question is Trump going to be smart enough not to agree to that? Is he going to be able to come to some agreement with Iran where he feels like, he doesn't need to do that? But I don't know. I would like to think that, that it's all bluster, and that the Moabs are being sent there just for leverage in negotiations, right? To try and scare Iran. That is a definite possibility. I don't discount that, and that could be absolutely true. But I don't know. Part of me thinks they're just a little bit too crazy and insane, and that is an option on the table, that they will try and go for this violent regime change. So, Carlo, you go right ahead. You had your finger up. You're waiting patiently.
Yeah, what I just wanted to add was, ever since Jared Kushner went to Gaza and looked out over the Mediterranean and saw under the sea the oil and the liquid natural gas, and saw the shoreline lined with Trump hotels, Trump was sold. That's the problem with Trump alone. You leave Trump alone, he's just going to look out for his own benefit. He he would jettison his entire cabinet if it meant that Elon Musk would put a few $1 billion in his coffer. He would get rid of everybody. He would get look at the havoc he's wreaking on domestic policy here in the U.S. I live in Washington. Well, I live a half mile out of the Washington D.C. line in Maryland. But it's essentially, this is where literally tens of thousands of government workers work, and they're all afraid of losing their livelihoods. They all pay taxes. He wants to talk about reducing the budget. Well, see how much the budget rises when these people don't pay taxes, and all go on local on the dole, whatever we call it here now. I can't. But anyway.
Well, I don't know if that's an argument. I mean, a federal worker who is qualified should be able to find a different job. If he can't, then why was he getting a taxpayer funded salary?
Well, there's not a lot of other jobs out there necessarily. Now, a lot of them are lawyers, but not a huge percentage. They will link up with other firms. There's always work for lawyers. They may not get the position they had, but the problem is, Trump is willing to take advice. Well, he'll throw everything up in the air, and if he sees this, I know it sounds idiotic to someone like you, people like you or me, but if he sees taking Gaza, and on the bodies of dead women and children, bulldozing the rubble and building apartment buildings and condominiums and luxury palaces for the uber wealthy, he'll do it. He'll try to do it. So we have to think in those terms. And he has a very limited time, a little less than 4 years to effect that. But if he can effect that, he will. If he can get the money behind it. And the other thing I wanted to mention was what I've been hearing in the press is that Egypt is ready to attack Israel. Now, I don't know about that, but I would like to hear somebody's opinion about it.
I mean, no, I don't think that's true. I think it's wishful thinking, probably. I mean, the Egyptian military is a wholly owned subsidiary of the U.S. military-industrial complex. So I highly doubt they're gonna. I mean, that government would topple before the military attacks Israel. That's my opinion.
Well, the Arab states could, if the Arab states wanted to hurt Israel, they wouldn't even need to attack it. They could just sanction it. We're not going to sell them oil. We're not going to sell them goods. We're not going to sell them anything. And I would say the largest reason that this mess in Gaza has gone on as long as it has is because those governments are not willing to take a hardline stance against Israel. That's just it.
I was gonna, before Carlo brought us to Egypt, I was gonna take us. I have shared your most recent article in the description of this video on Reading Junkie. So I didn't read it though. I haven't read that article, but let's go back to the meeting between Zelensky and Trump. We were streaming live on Friday when that meeting was taking place. So we didn't discuss it. We were all assuming on the show last week that, they were going to sign this agreement and Trump was going to kind of, appear to side with Ukraine. And he was now going to go ahead and continue to support them for the next year because of this agreement. And that's what I thought was going to happen. And that's what a lot of people thought was going to happen. And then kind of the opposite happened. That agreement didn't get signed. And then, the rhetoric was so, over the top between Zelensky and Trump. But Ian, what did you write in that article? You were talking about J.D. Vance. It's Ian's article, Skoidat.
So, so I wrote something. If you want to, can you display it? Is it possible to?
Yeah,
share
let me
screen
work
and
on that.
display
So
it.
go ahead and talk about it. I'll work on
I wrote 2 articles. So one in the previous one, which I discussed on I think I discussed in the last show, was that the meeting was very much like the Yalta conference. But in this one, I don't know why, because for some reason, I think a lot of the Ukraine supporters, in particular, liberals, Ukraine supporters, targeted JD Vance specifically, and I think it's because JD Vance was the one who really jumped into the conversation and went after Zelensky in that. And a lot of people were asking, well, why is the vice president so involved? So basically my point in that article was that that's actually normal, and whether you agree or disagree with whatever administration is in power at the moment, the vice president is typically a very front-facing figure, a very front-facing public figure in that administration. We've just kind of forgotten that because we've had so many weak vice presidents. It's been a while since we had Kamala Harris, who I don't know what she was doing in those whole 4 years. It doesn't seem like she did anything. She was put in charge of the border, and then when she ran for president, media outlets went and stealth edited their own articles to remove references to her being in charge of the border because she was so bad at it. And then before that, you had Mike Pence, who was, I guess, had some sort of personality issue with Trump. So he really did not do anything. He was actually in charge of our Operation Warp Speed and dealing with the pandemic. And he really didn't do, and that was his chance to shine, to really take charge of the COVID response and be a household name and be a respected figure in American politics. But he really didn't do anything. And unfortunately, there was precedent for that for him personally, because there was also an AIDS epidemic when he was the governor of Indiana, and he didn't really care too much about that either. So he didn't do much as vice president. And then before that, you had Joe Biden as vice president. I think, honestly, he was kind of a mental vegetable even 8 years ago when he was, no, oh my gosh, it was more than 8 years ago, 12 years ago, 16 years ago, when he was vice president. I think he didn't do much. And also I mentioned in the article, part of the reason Joe Biden did not do much as vice president is because he was so overshadowed by Hillary Clinton, who considered herself the president even when she was Secretary of State. She was acting like the president. She was overstepping the vice president. She was even overstepping the president himself. But she was such she
had been president for 8 years prior to that. So
right. She was such a powerful figure in the Democratic establishment. I mean, I think it's very clear. I mean, Obama speaks nicely of her now, but I think at the time it was very obvious that he really did not like her. But there wasn't anything he could do about it because he was a junior senator who was picked to be the president. And she actually had more influence over the party than he did. So, it's been, my gosh, so it's been basically 16. I mean, the last really major vice president we had was Dick Cheney. And the thing with Dick Cheney was that he was big on making himself rich, making his buddies rich in Iraq. But so it's just been a while since we've actually had a real vice president. So that was my main point. So people not understand, well, why is JD Vance such a big figure? So you can like JD Vance or you can hate him, but the point is that is what a vice president does. And
I think the people that are behind Trump are banking on Vance having the next 8 years. I think that would be probably the basic plan, because they don't want the Trump agenda to be derailed, in the next election. And so I'm fairly certain they're happy to have Vance front and center a lot, and we'll see a lot of him just because
And I agree with you. And I think that's also why he's getting so much criticism. It's like, why do they specifically go after JD Vance? Like they really go after him. I think everybody kind of understands it, even if they don't directly say it, that when Trump is done, in 4 years. J.D. Vance is kind of the logical person to be the next presidential nominee. I think Mike Pence actually was the logical person, but he turned on Trump. Yes, he turned on Trump, which got him accolades from the Democrats, but it's torpedoed his own career. I think J.D. Vance himself understands that if he doesn't shoot himself in the foot, he's almost guaranteed a good spot in the. Carlo really wants to say something, so I'll give him a chance. Can we unmute him? I'll unmute him.
Well, he can unmute himself.
I just wanted to say then, if it's Vance, why does someone with such, is this just media hype, or why does someone that's so unpopular among the U.S. electorate, why would he be seen as someone that could?
Well, is he actually? I mean, I don't see any evidence that he's unpopular, except Democrats say he's unpopular. Like, I mean, if you think about, and again, I'm not saying you have to agree with him or like him, but say if you just look at him as a candidate and as a politician, he's from a poor, messed up family in Appalachia. So he's lift yourself up by the bootstraps kind of guy, right? Have you
seen the movie?
Narrative.
I haven't seen the movie.
I have not. I have not. I just heard descriptions of it, but
I've seen the movie.
So, and he was a Marine, and he does have a combat action ribbon. So he went to Iraq, actually saw combat. So he checks all the boxes. And it's kind of interesting to me because, like, even on Facebook, because I used to actually it's interesting, after the Zelensky meeting, most of my Democrat followers on Facebook who hadn't already blocked me after the Zelensky meeting. It emotionally broke them, but they were like, "Oh, well, and they loved Tim Walz." I remember how much they loved Tim Walz. Well, Tim Walz was in the military for 20 years, but somehow missed every single war that happened while he didn't do anything. And J.D. Vance did 4 years in the Marine Corps, and then he went to Iraq, like most guys in the Marine Corps did at that time period. And it's like, love him or hate him, but he checks all the boxes for a presidential candidate.
Well,
what is that?
I wanted to ask specifically about your guys' take on what happened in that meeting. So you had a good almost hour of just normal, everything you would expect from a meeting like that, and then at the very end, it went sideways. Was it a planned ambush? Was it theater? Like, what's your guys' comprehensive take on that aspect?
I'll let Carlo go first.
It was a mix. What happened is that, well, you had Stemmer and who was it, Macron, come to Washington in the days before, and I'm sure that Zelensky said he was going to sign that $500 billion rare earths, not raw earths, like it's locked in Trump's tiny little reptilian brain. Raw earths, rare earths is the proper term. There used to be a 60s rock band called Rare Earth, and that's where I learned that. So anyway, they said they were sure they had a deal, and but Zelensky was starting to sour the room by asking for or saying that he was going to receive security from the U.S. that essentially what Macron and Stemmer had told him was that the U.S. would give him would agree to if let me back up, if Britain and France and other EU countries were willing to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, the U.S. would give them a security agreement. And that was a way, and this I got from Mersheimer's too, that would be a way of tricking the U.S. into entering this war. but against Russia. That would make the U.S. have to go, and I think Trump and Vance and their people got a whiff of that, and somebody went over and schooled Vance, and I know who it was, and Vance came out with that very cogent remark to Zelensky that look, this is as a way of deflecting it. Look, you come here, and you've this is going to sound a little crazy, but one so-called reporter, and I'd like to know who he's from, asked Zelensky why he wasn't wearing a suit, and at that moment, the conversation shifted, and that might have been a tell. That
That's
might have been
interesting.
like what the
Yeah.
manager of a baseball team does when he
Yeah.
wants you to steal a base, and that might have been a tell that this was not going. And then Zelensky went and wouldn't renege, and that set Trump off. And so I think it was partially a setup that had gone wrong, a deal that had gone wrong, and I think the anger was genuine, though Vance showed an ability to sort of stay diplomatic in his speech, even though he was obviously upset. Whereas Trump, obviously like myself, could not control his anger, and so I think that's what happened. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, it does seem like, because the idea was a setup. Only goes off of that because there was that 10-minute clip of Zelensky and Trump and Vance actually arguing with each other, but there'd been 40 minutes of cordial conversation before that. Even the mainstream news outlets admitted that there was a dinner cooking. The chefs were in the kitchen prepping the dinner that they were supposed to have afterwards. There was no evidence. There weren't any, not evidence, but there weren't any signs that this was going to be a hostile meeting. Everybody's planning to have a nice public discourse in front of the media, then go have dinner, and then spend the evening together. And I think really I think it was set up to fail because for whatever reason, there's speculation on the reason. But Zelensky went into that not able to say yes to that agreement. And it does seem like he had already gone to the Brits and made that same deal. I'll give the Brits, I'll make Britain great again. I'll bring the British Empire back. I'll give them Ukraine's resources. Then I think that's, considering the fact he went to Britain immediately after, that was the next flight. That was the next flight on his itinerary. I think that's the most likely explanation for why it was. He'd already promised the crown jewels to the British to Starmer.
Huh. I mean, there's speculation that there are no resources, right? That there's really hardly any resources anyway, and that that whole thing was a hoax. There's no 500 billion worth of resources.
Well, there's not. I mean, it's exaggerated, and it seems. And even if there was 500 billion, even if there was $500 billion worth of rare earth minerals and petroleum or what have not in the ground in Ukraine. Well, one, you would need a stable peacetime country to actually pull it out of the ground, build the infrastructure, pull it out of the ground. And also it's a market. It's a global market. You can't Russia has the same problem. They've got literally trillions of gold and petroleum, shale, and all this stuff in the ground. So you can't pull it up all at once because that collapses the prices. So you can't say, I'm going to base my whole economy on. I mean, Saudi Arabia can, Kuwait can, but if you're in a large country with a large population, you can't base your whole economy on being an exporter of energy and raw resources because there's just not the market for it. You'll collapse prices. So any idea that Ukraine was going to be a treasure trove of natural resources, even if it was true that it has those resources. The global market is literally not big enough to make that true.
To me, okay, Carlo, and then I get to go.
Carlo,
Your turn.
yes.
And just to add to the conversation about the Zelensky meeting, is that think of the charge that Trump could have put in MAGA if he signed a $500 billion deal, whether it ever came to fruition or not. Obviously, in the next 3 years, and the man's 2 years older than I am, in the next 3 years, much could be done. Think of the charge it would immediately put in. Just the rhetoric of that kind of a deal. $500 billion. You got people living in trailers on, a few $100s a month who voted for this guy. And then you can dream about $500 billion. And so I think that was on Trump's mind. Now I can't go out and fill the stadiums again. Now they're only going to be half filled. But if I had that $500 billion deal, I would be king of the deal. It's all about the deal. It's just like Gaza.
I agree with Carlo. And at first, that was what it seemed to be, right? It seemed that this was going to be Trump's justification to kind of backtrack and do a 180-degree turn about his approach to Russia and Ukraine, because he'd always been, Ukraine isn't, I'm not going to support Ukraine. And then I thought that, to justify switching his approach to that and saying, okay, now we're going to go ahead and protect Ukraine for the rest of the year, or for another year, because they're signing us this deal, and now I'm justified in doing that. I thought that was the point, and he was going to try and sell a pivot to his base through this deal, whether or not the deal was real or not. But when it fell through, I'm thinking that it was maybe theater in the other direction, right? It was theater in the other direction to justify, hey, I am trying to do the right thing here, and it's this guy, it's Zelensky, who's intransigent, and now he can point to Zelensky and this meeting and Zelensky's intransigence to justify, not doing what the entire European Union, the entirety of the liberal press is demanding that he does. You got to continue to support Ukraine. And again, the question is, to what end? Like, what options are there on the table for protecting Ukraine? There are no options. So surrender has to happen, but it's all about optics, right? It's about how is Trump going to sell this surrender, this pivot? Well, he's going to do what Hegseth. So this is Brian Berletic, right? So Pete Hegseth went to Europe and he said, we're going to have a division of labor. The division of labor. The United States is going to be focused on Asia. Europe, you got to deal with Ukraine. You got to deal with Russia. And to do that, you got to double from 2% or 2.5% of your military spending to 5%. And so, of course, that's not in the interest of the European people. It's guns or butter. The European people are used to a lot of butter. They've been subsidized to have a lot of access to butter over the past several decades. And they're going to really get angry at their governments for doubling military spending and lessening, the amount of butter that they have access to. But I don't know. So how do you sell that? How do you make that happen? You blame Zelensky. So to me, that meeting was very nice for Trump. He can point to it and use it as justification for, hey, we're doing our best. It's this motherfucker that is keeping us from being able to do this deal. And because I'm not sure there is a doable deal. And so, what's the deal? I mean, maybe they can talk about it. And if they do talk about it with Russia, try and figure something out. They need Zelensky to make huge concessions. And if Zelensky is not going to make huge concessions, a deal can't be done. And the U.S. needs to just walk away and hand it off to Russia. But again, does Trump want to take heat for that? Does he want to expose himself to the criticisms about that? No, he wants to blame Zelensky. Anyway, it's an interesting dynamics, interesting paradigm taking place there. And just what will happen, that is the most interesting question about how it all is going to play out. So So Regis did get back to me. Regis explained it was definitely the internet that dropped. He's sorry that he can't, rejoin us, but that happens. And we did pretty good. We picked up the pieces. We got through our topics in his absence. But what else? You got something to say, Ian? You're muted. Nobody can hear you.
Okay, so I want to respond to Skoy. Sorry, I muted myself because my dog barks when I'm on the show. He's quiet the rest of the day, but as soon as I get in the show, he barks. But anyways, Skoy had asked about the blog article, and I tried to share the link. He's saying the link is broken, but basically, he's asking about people who edited. About news articles that edited their own references to Kamala Harris. I just want to quickly tell him, he says the link didn't work, but basically go on Google, look up references to news outlets changing their stories about her being the border czar. Because early in the Biden administration, he had appointed Kamala Harris as the border czar. And then when Biden was dropped or pushed out, depending who you want to believe, and Kamala Harris was the Democratic nominee for the election. Major news outlets actually went back and edited their own articles previously, calling her the border czar, because everybody had agreed she's the border czar. She even went to Honduras, like there was that famous incident where she went to Honduras and said, "Don't come to the USA. Do not come. And then they went back and said, well, actually, she wasn't in charge of the border because they just didn't want that failure associated with her. So that's just a quick reference, a quick response I wanted to make to the comments, because I don't want people to feel like they make comments and we don't respond to them. So yeah,
I want to have a little fun and just talk bad about that commenter. I mean, like, how stupid do you have to be to think that, our media would never do that? Because that seems to be kind of what
I think it was a fair question. He might not have caught that news. So that's I'm being nice and explaining.
When I hear you say that without ever, seen any proof of that myself, it just coincides with the obvious reality. So I don't even think of questioning it or demanding proof. Like it just coincides so correctly with how the media behaves.
He was one of the very few people who clicked on the link in the description and read the article. So let's be nice to our readers. He read the blog article. I mean, I have he's one of the 3 people who reads my blog now. So congratulations. He's
one of the 3 viewers watching our program.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I shouldn't berate him. But
so let's not berate him.
But I know he's a little ornery in the comments, and so I think he's probably
driving reach to the video. Let's give him credit where he's due.
And he's probably open,
and he's also a repeat viewer. I remember him from the last time.
Yes.
So let's
talking some shit.
Let's give him the credit. You can be a little ornery if you watch the show.
No, you can, and it gives us something to engage with. So we're a minute. We're an hour and a half in. We can wrap it up, gentlemen, or we can, go down to some more discussion topics. I know I am going to be on vacation for a couple weeks starting, this week. And so I'm not going to be able to do a show on Friday. I'm going to be on an airplane this time on Friday. Maybe next week I can join us. I can host the show from. I'll be in Thailand actually, so maybe I can host the show from Thailand. But we'll take it as it comes. Any other topics of discussion?
Yeah, I think it's a good closing point unless Carlo has something to say. He's muted. All right. But yeah, let's.
He was shaking his head. I could tell by his body language. So, thank you, commenters, even the honorary ones. We do appreciate it. And we will reconvene not Friday, but perhaps next week. So I'm sure there will be a lot of goings on in the meantime that we will want to convene and discuss about. So we will see everyone then. Thank you very much and goodbye.